Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Seftimor Podcast. Today, I got a book review for you by one of my favorite authors, Brian Smith. The book is called Last Day. If you're a follower of SeftimorLive.com, where this blog article was published first, you know I love horror. In this podcast, I'll be reviewing Brian Smith's new book, Last Day. It is the biggest passion I have besides reading self-help books, self-actualization, and making content is horror. An author that I've been reading for years is Brian Smith. When you watch and read as much horror as I do, you get numb to most things. Therein lies the problem. We seek out the darker stuff, the movies or books that will push our limits to see what we can handle. Brian Smith is a splatterpunk author. Splatterpunk is a literary genre characterized by the explicit description of horrific, violent, and often pornographic scenes. So, let me explain. When I was about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was reading Ain't It Cool News, and Ain't It Cool News every week had a review for comic books and books. And they mentioned Stephen King came out with a new book called Full Dark No Stars, All Dark No Stars, Full Dark No Stars. And in the review, the guy said that it was a novella where King was limited to short stories. And in these short stories, he was a lot more, he was not like descriptive where, the wall was red with speckles of black and the black had this tint to it, but they said that he was more like Richard Lehman when he wrote like that, and I didn't know who Richard Lehman was. So that weekend I bought my first Lehman book, which was Funland, and it blew me away just because it was straight to the point, crazy, and pushed my limits for what I was reading at the time. So I forget where I first heard of Brian Smith. It wasn't on Brian Keene's podcast, but I think it was just looking through Layman and seeing authors. I think it was on Goodreads, and I looked at the best splatterpunk books, and Brian Smith's The Killing Kind was on there. And I read that book, and it was Layman, but for my generation. So Layman, started in I'm pretty sure the 80s or 90s, and he wrote a bunch, and then he sadly passed away. But anyway, this is my favorite genre. It is off the wall, so warning, it is crazy, it is graphic, but I like that straight in your face craziness that is the splatterpunk genre, and Brian Smith is my favorite splatterpunk author. So now that that's out of the way, you know what type of author, what type of book this is. Splatterpunk is one of my favorite genres because they're short and to the point. While there are character development and story, splatterpunk starts insanely and never lets up. Needless to say, Smith is my favorite author, and I couldn't wait to read his new novel, Last Day. Last Day is an apocalyptic novel. It goes through the final hours of Earth as we know it. The story is one we have seen before. An asteroid is barreling down at Earth, and civilization has about 24 hours to live. Last Day shows us the consequences of total anarchy. It shows us how bad humanity can be in times of pure and utter chaos. Most of us would be with our loved ones or doing our favorite things, since we've only have a little bit of time left. Probably, having some sexy time with the significant other or otherwise. Other people would be on a mass killing spree. They would be relishing in the most fucked up shit known to man. Brian Smith goes for the latter in this book. He shows us how messed up society could be in the final hours, and it gets nuts. It's crazy, but for me, and being a gigantic Brian Smith fan, there was a little bit of a con to that, and I'll get into that. Brian Smith novels have their fair share of depravity. He usually rounds out rounds it out with characters we can root for. So it's crazy, but we have someone like, yeah, we're rooting for, just like, a hero in a book. Such is not the case for me with Last Day. Most of the characters in the novel are ruthless, cold-blooded killers. Last Day is a novel where no one is safe, and almost everybody in this book gets tortured or messed up in some way. Being an avid Bryan Smith fan, I had to take a step back with this one. Last Day is Smith's most messed up and goriest book to date, at least for the ones I've read so far. The scenes in the novel are graphic, in your face, just like splatterpunk should be, like I said before. Sex and violence are the backbones of Smith's novels, and Last Day takes it to a new level. My limits. I've seen everything. I've read most. Even Edward Lee got tested with this book. Bryan Smith writes ultra-violent books, but there is always, like I said before, someone to root for, even if you're rooting for the bad guy. I found it difficult to root for anyone in Last Day, and this would be my biggest con. While the story moves at a great pace, Last Day was a novel that took me a while to finish. Usually I finish Bryan Smith books really, really fast, sometimes even in one day. Last Day took me a few months to get through. It wasn't because of the lack of caring for the characters and the story. It was because of the lack of caring for characters and story, And the reason for that is I was just taken out of it a little bit because I just didn't care what was going to happen to these people, because they were all either extremely shitty and I didn't care what was going to happen, or the heroes had their own bits of messed up and I just didn't care. The normal feelings of remorse when something bad happens to a character were there, but at the end of the chapter, I didn't care for the outcomes for most characters. Splatterpunk is my favorite genre because there's no intermission in the craziness. It never lets up and it keeps going. Last Day felt like Smith was pushing the envelope of violence rather than characters to root for. As I said before, Bryan Smith is one of my favorite authors. When he releases a book, I immediately buy it. I fell in love with Smith's work from reading his series Depraved and The Killing Kind, like I mentioned before. Last Day was a fun ride, but a few cons here and there made it one that wasn't one of my favorites. My favorite book the year it was released by Bryan Smith was Slowly We Rot. If you've never read one of Smith's novels, I recommend this one first. It's very long for him, and it's a really, really great story first. And the gore and everything goes back to the back a little bit. If you're looking for a book that is extreme and a wild ride, but you can't go wrong with picking up Last Day. I'm currently reading his new novella, Kill for Satan. So far, that one's incredible, and there'll be a review coming on that once I finish it. If you buy any books from Amazon, link will be in the description. Supports the podcast. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching if you're on YouTube. If you enjoyed this or are a Splatterpunk fan, please drop some book recommendations in the comments. And otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you. Peace.